and now we are going to have a panel discussion, another one, and this time the topic will be the future of research funding in Norway. And I will then directly call up the moderator to this session, Vibeke Irgan. Please come up. Vibeke, she is a senior advisor and leader of the support team for externally funded research projects at the University of Bergen, very relevant for this discussion. So then I just say, please, Vibeke, and you will also then introduce the participants.
Yes.
So.
Okay, thank you, Trygve, and welcome all to this session about the future of the research funding. And as Per Koch pointed out yesterday, the future has not yet happened, so it's not so easy to say anything about that, but some of us might also think that the future is upon us already with all the changes that has happened. I will first welcome Kjetill Jakobsen, who is a professor at the Center for Ecological and Evolutionary Synthesis at the University of Oslo, who will give a short introduction. And if the panel will just take a seat, then I will introduce them later on.
Good morning, everyone. I've been asked to do a short introduction here to the topic discussion. I'll not talk about cod. You see, I'm holding a cod head here. I'm not going to talk about cod here today. I just want to say that I'm heading the Earth Biogenome Project, where the goal is to sequence all species in Norway and generate high-quality genomes. Won't talk more about that. Just want to say that it's funded by the Research Council, so we have a kind of funding intro to the thing. But I want to go a little bit step back in a way to research financing in Norway. And from my point of view, it's bad times, and they might continue, and that is seen from a curiosity-driven point of view. Basic science point of view. But in a longer historic perspective, I would say that research is pretty well financed in Norway in the period, for example, from 1990 to 2010. And one example here is the FUGE program, Functional Genomics Program, from 2002 to 2012. That was altogether had a frame of 1.6 billion Norwegian kroner. And what actually the FUGE program did, because I was there and I had experienced this, it took us from the Stone Age. We were really Stone Age science in Norway at that time in molecular biology. And it took us to where we were kind of supposed to be. Same equal as Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and so on that we like to compare with. And then FUGE was criticized by someone that it wasn't enough innovation, it wasn't enough commercial things coming out with. Well, we came from the Stone Age to, let's say, a normal level. If this had continued, then we would have seen the innovation, is my point. Okay, enough with FUGE. We can go to Sweden. There's a new program there called Data-Driven Life Science, funded by the Wallenberg Foundation, so it's kind of private funding. That's 3.1 billion Swedish crowns. It's a 12-year program, so it's pretty long. But it has 4 pillars, if you call it pillars or areas. That is precision medicine and diagnostics. It's epidemiology and biology of infection, cell and molecular biology, and evolution and biodiversity. So it has the whole spectrum, as I say, of different things. And you might say, oh, evolution and biodiversity, that's not important. Well, that is important for a sustainable development in the future. If you also look upon the private sector, I would say that private research foundations are more or less lacking. I'm not saying they're lacking totally, but if you compare with Sweden, Wallenberg, as has mentioned, Denmark has Carlsberg, Novo Nordisk, Lundbeck, Willum, and so on. UK, for example, has the Wellcome Trust, and they support, since I mentioned the Earth Biogenome Project, the UK project of that kind is called Darwin Tree of Life, and it's funded with 8 billion Norwegian kroner, and it's UK and Ireland. Well, we have small and dedicated foundations in Norway, like Moen, Jepsen, Kavli, that are usually dedicated and small. So there is a strong need for a general fund for basic and applied science in Norway. And that, in my opinion, that has to be a collaboration between private and the government. So, word to you young people here. What you probably are aware of, and if not, you should be aware of this, and that is, if you're going to continue in science, you have to be able to obtain funding. You have to be able to obtain funding. Or maybe you could lean upon a good professor that is getting, but sooner or later you will have to do this. And for that reason, and I think Digital Life is a good example here, build strong networks. Local networks, national networks, international network. That's super important. And I also think that being cross-disciplinary or transdisciplinary, as is said in the Digital Life, that is a help. I say often helps. Let's just take a short look at the current trends, as I say, and we see Borten Moe here. I think that he has a kind of, this smile and this look of him is kind of that's saying quite a bit. I took this picture from Wikipedia, so it's out there in the comment. But he's gone, but his views are not alone. So reduced support for basic curiosity-driven science is what we see. Thematic research is prioritized. Social challenges, naturally, in focus. For applied research is prioritized, and innovation. And what we also see is that it's a much stronger, let's call it, political governance of the research. We are asked by Borten Moe to put our emphasis on food, for example, or food for animals, feed or fodder. It's a good example. The other point I would like to mention, and that was also touched upon by Professor Sicknis yesterday, which is a super interesting case, the CRISPR-Cas. And so curiosity-driven science, if it is of a certain quality, will spur innovation. And it goes so fast. It goes extremely fast. 6 months was to the first application. I think also Professor Sicknis showed that, how fast it was yesterday. Yeah, I'm showing some pictures we had, because we had Emmanuel Charpentier, who got the Nobel Prize for this as a guest and speaker just a few weeks ago. And here you see me, for example, and Rector Svein Stølen being kind of, let's say, we are shining together with her. It's a big thing for us, of course. I think that it is important to have in mind that there is a very short way from the findings to the application when it is disruptive things that you find. And very often we are talking about what I call incremental things. I think that you should have more focus on the disruptive things. It will have a much bigger effect. Future perspectives are two different types of perspective, and this is my last slide. The bad trend, as I call it, will continue. More thematic and applied programs, more focus on just innovation for innovation's kind of own sake. More political governance. So reduced freedom is the result. There's a positive alternative. And that is that it is realized by politicians that we need a stronger focus on science to meet future challenges. That is climate change, pollution, food, emerging pathogens, human health, etc. And as a consequence of that, is increased for all kinds of research as applied and basic. I'm not sure if I really believe in this, but it's kind of wishful thinking. Maybe that will happen instead of, I think, what we see now. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Kjetill. That's some interesting perspectives that I think the panel will like to comment on later on. And we have planned for questions at the end, but if you really have something, you should scream and shout, and then we will give you the word. But before we move on, I want to introduce the panel. I will start with Simen Enger, who is a special advisor at the Norwegian Cancer Society. And we have Cathrine Meland from the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Fisheries. She's head of Department of Research and Innovation. And then we have Johan Borge, Director of Health Research and Health Innovation from the Research Council of Norway. So before we move on to the future, or continue towards the future, we would like to hear also a little bit about how the current state is, right? And Cathrine, when we talk about the Norwegian public research funding system, can you walk us through the different departments and how the money are distributed? Because I think that's also interesting to know.
Yes, certainly. Thank you very much for your interesting question and interesting topic. I just want to start by saying a little bit about the different responsibilities for the different ministries in the government. In Norway, of course, the government as a whole has the overall responsibility for research policy. The government as a whole sets the priorities, sets the budgets, and the direction for research policy. It is the Ministry of Research and Higher Education who have the responsibility to coordinate the research policy and higher education. They have a special responsibility for basic research, and they have a special responsibility for cross-sector research. And the Ministry of Education, of Research and Higher Education also coordinates the government's plan on the long-term plan on research and higher education. And this is quite an important plan because it's like you mentioned, that's where that's the place where the directions and the overarching goals are presented, and the relationship between applied science and basic science and other areas. So that's a very important plan for the government to follow, and it's a huge work within the government. So the Ministry of Research and Higher Education has a very important role in the government. However, every ministry has a responsibility for research in their own sector, in their own responsibility area. And two of the other main research ministries in the government is my ministry, which is the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Fisheries, and it's also the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health finance their research through the Research Council and the Regional Health Authority, so they got major grants towards research within their areas. We, however, finance research in business-oriented financial instruments. That's where we apply the money for that kind of research. And we have different instruments to support business-oriented research. So that's our main goal. So you can see it's a bit different logic within the different ministries. Yeah, I think I'll start with that as a start, and we'll get back to the rest.
And for most of us, we are not so familiar with the departments and how money is moved around there. It's mainly the Research Council who is the focus of the researchers' attention. So I don't know if you will give us some insights and how things are decided and how things will change.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think I would like to answer any question regarding. I mean, you guys could sit next to me in the office to see how we work, because we would like to be as transparent as absolutely possible. I mean, in my mind, we are in the same boat. We want the same thing. We're on the same team, and that goes with the parliament and the government and all the ministries. We all do want the same thing. So your presentation was excellent. I would have, however, since we are talking to quite a few young people here, to my mind, I think we are in a situation where, of course, it's never going to be enough money, as we heard in this part of the room last night. But still, there is quite a significant amount of money towards science. I mean, health is the largest research area of all research areas in Norway. 12 billion Norwegian crowns every year. The Research Council, we handle 2 billion, meaning that it's just 16–17% of the money going to health research actually channeled through the Research Council. So be aware of that. I mean, if you look towards the Research Council, that's fine, but there are other sources as well. And regarding to the topic of today, I think what is kind of my challenge to you guys, or to the young ones at least, is you need to do things different than your bosses, because they could apply for FRIPRO or the basic curiosity-driven grant. You can do that, of course, in the future as well, but you're gonna need to play on more instruments than just that single one. So I can elaborate on that, but I think we want to do our job. I mean, it's our common money, the Norwegian society's money, and we are set to handle them in the best possible way. I would like to start there.
Yeah, and I would then thank you. I would like to ask Simen, because you represent one of the few private founders or foundations in Norway, and I mean, how do you look at, from your perspective, the synergies between the department and the Research Council and you, and will you say something about that?
Yeah, so the Norwegian Cancer Society, some people might wonder, why am I here today? And Kjetill didn't mention us in his overview of the funding landscape here on national funding of research. We are not a foundation, we are an NGO, but we are also, and we work for improving the conditions for cancer patients in Norway, but we are also the largest private funder of research in Norway, and we account for, I think, approximately 1/3 of all competitive research to cancer research in Norway. So we are a significant player in this system, and we are also really dependent on the health trusts and the Research Council of Norway, but also the ministry's priorities, and that we are trying to kind of avoid we are trying to looking for more complementarity with our funding and more co-funding that Kjetill also addressed. The kind of getting some more synergies between private and public funding. And recently, as an example, we were approached by Helse Vest, the health trust here in Bergen, to co-fund this proof of concept scheme that they annually announce, and in order to kind of attract more cancer research or innovation projects. So these are some of the ways that we like to work. By that being more agile and trying to kind of collaborate with the other institutions that fund research in Norway.
So in a way, you can argue that the synergy you're thinking about is more like the old Matthew principle, that if you have something, then it's more likely that you will get much more, right? Or
I'm not. Do you ask if from the researcher perspective?
Yeah, from the researcher's perspective.
Well, the funding that we allocate is the major part of the funding that we provide to the Norwegian researchers are basic research. And that kind of research is allocated through peer review panels, and the main thing is quality. That's what matters, and we really don't care if you're a young researcher or if you're a senior researcher, but of course, we all know that the Matthew principle reigns in research funding, and that's how it usually is. But we also, in these kind of funding schemes, we are also setting aside some parts of the funding that are prioritized for the young researchers, those that are below 35 years old or 2 to 3 years after their PhD defense, for example. So we are trying to kind of lift them up, but we also need the Research Council of Norway to fund also the young researchers as well. We can't do it alone, and of course we aren't doing it.
No.
So.
I think you want to
Yeah,
comment.
just a short comment. I think I meet colleagues of you probably every week. And one thing you might not be aware is that three-quarter of the amount of money that goes to health research is because health research is excellent and competing with all kinds of research. It could be water, it could be traffic, it could be shipping, it could be, I mean, whatever. So you guys within the health, life science domain are competing, very competitive. And that is because like money from the Cancer Society. I mean, that's why we have a lot of cancer research in Norway. I mean, we are probably funding more cancer research than what we would have done if it hadn't been for the Cancer Research or the Cancer Society, because they are funding the researchers, they are getting better, and then they compete better. You understand?
Yes. Do you understand?
Could I
yeah, of course.
just comment on one thing that I forgot to comment on is we're talking about the Norwegian system and the Norwegian total budget and the overarching goals for research policy. And I think it's necessary to say that the EU programs, the EU partnerships is a part of the Norwegian research or the knowledge system in Norway. We are spending an enormous amount of money from the total budget on the EU programs and the EU partnership, and I think it's a good thing. But it's very important that we see this all together, that we use all these instruments and towards our common goals to solving the society's challenges.
Quick follow-up on that. When I'm sitting and making our budgets, I have to decide together with the board, are we going to spend this million in a Norwegian call, or are we going to funnel it through one of the European calls? So it's 100% integrated. So when you think about research funding, I mean, listen to what Cathrine tells you. It's extremely, it's sewn together.
So, yeah, Kjetill.
I just want to follow up one thing that you mentioned, Johan, to the young people here when you say that don't do the same thing as your supervisors did. And I agree with that. I think so. But I also would like to emphasize that you should try to think outside the box. Try to think outside the box. Not just repeating what you learned and just continue on that. Add new things. Try to think transdisciplinary. Even if you are not the expert in a new field, you are an expert in your own field, but you get people in together and you work from different angles. And that's how you can make a project that would have a better chance to be funded. That's my thinking.
I think we already have a question from the audience. Do you need a microphone?
Ask about what you were saying there about using the EU mechanism, which I completely agree in theory. The problem is that I'm involved in several Pathfinder grants here at Bergen with other EU institutions, and the level of support that they get from their institutions is incredible. They have somebody who's dedicated, managers on those projects. Now, we put in an EIC Pathfinder last year, and we actually cleared the threshold for funding. We didn't get the funding, but we had to do everything ourselves. And I'm actually delighted that I didn't get it, because now that I'm involved in another EIC Pathfinder, and I see all the bureaucracy that you have to go through with the EU, there is no mechanism at UIB to be able to support that. So how do you foresee that we can actually really exploit, like Norway sucks. I'm sorry, it does, at actually extracting funds from the EU. How do you see that we can, as employees of the university, be able to mobilize that mechanism to our advantage when we're at such a handicap when it comes from the admin side?
Is it on? So a short question to the Research Council. I unfortunately have a past in the Research Council myself, so that's why I feel urged to ask that question now. And it's kind of like playing the role of Dr. Doom, because I think that I have a side position as an R&D advisor, and I also had an advisory position regarding research funding. And what I see as a recurring trend, with or without Ola Borten Moe, is that the base allowance for the research institutions is going down from the ministries, and also the funding for basic research is going down. We all kind of see that. I don't think that trend is going to change, in the immediate future. While at the same time, the funders and the policymakers want radically interdisciplinary research, and they want transdisciplinary research, as Kjetill says. However, the researchers themselves are at the loss of really developing the rigor in those interdisciplinary kind of proposals and the calls that they actually are asked to present. A lot of times, sometimes not, but I think it's just, what would the Research Council, what kind of advice would you give to young researchers who are urged to develop proposals that are radically interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary?
So, but I think there were several questions now suddenly. So if we first go to Ahmed's comment about the complexity, because we know also that the projects are more complex. You ask for it. So how are you going to help us?
I can start with a comment regarding the European Union. I think that, let me start on a different footing. I think for the young scientist, do not be scared of what he is telling you. Because nobody wants the situation to be like the one you are describing. Nobody wants that. I mean, I don't, the ministry don't. Nobody wants it to be like that. So then, if we agree that we don't want it to be like that, the European Union as well, they do not want us to put too much effort into the administrative burden of both applying and then earning and managing a grant. So I think it's up to you guys to have administrative systems in place that are good enough. And the
I'm working at the medical faculty. It's 80 million in debt after COVID, right? There's a stall on freezing of positions. Professors are retiring. They're not being recruited. New people are coming in. And the administrative staff, they're all leaving because they're so overburdened. Like, telling me to solve that problem is ridiculous. I have a group of 20 people, How am I going to have the time to administrate a grant? Like, I'm on this EIC Pathfinder. We have our first review coming up next month. We have 5 meetings organized by the coordinator, who is solely employed to deal with this stuff. We don't have access to that. I'm sorry, but, this is the reality of the situation. We have great ideas, we have great projects, we have great science in Norway, but we do not have the mechanisms to be able to exploit it. The European universities, they're geared up solely for EU grants. They have everything in place. If we want to catch up and we want to exploit it, the ministry, or whoever it is, needs to put more money into the universities so that we can actually exploit this.
I think I just want to comment on that, because I agree, and I know from other university it's very similar, that the admin support is not sufficient for the big projects. But I think it's more for the ministry than for the Research Council, really, also. So I don't know if this is something that you can bring home, Cathrine.
Bring home, I can. This is certainly not unfamiliar questions that you're bringing up. I think that's the balance between how to divide the total budget between the EU projects, which we know are quite administrative. They take a lot of administrative resources, and the national programs. It's something that we have to have an eye on all the time, and I think evaluating the Horizon programs now it's very important. We need to take part of the Horizon programs, of course we do. It's the networks, it's the resources, it's everything, and we have a good return from the programs, not only Horizon but other programs as well. But I think it's important to have have a look at how to use the total amount of money that we are using on research, and that's a balance between basic and applied. It's a balance between the national programs and the EU programs, and also I think. To be frank, it's so important to put enough on the support system, and I think it's fair to ask the questions: is there enough on the support system for the research, for the European program? So it's a good question. I'm not going to answer on behalf of the Ministry of Research and Higher Education. I don't think they would appreciate that. My perspective is, of course, on the different kind of logic, which is about the business-oriented financial instruments, so which has a little bit of a different logic, but where the EU program is, of course, very important, even some different programs than the Horizon.
I think both Simen and also Johan would like to comment, and also another comment or a question. Both. So first Simen, and then we'll take you, and then Johan.
Yeah, thanks. Luckily, I'm no longer employed in the Ministry of Education and Research, so I don't really need to answer for it. But I would say that when it comes to kind of the administrative resources, the institutions themselves also have a responsibility of providing that kind of support. But I understand that with kind of rough budgets, it's really difficult to do all the priorities and that kind of things. But the Research Council of Norway is also providing excellent kind of researcher support on how to apply for these type of EU grants. And we are seeing that, at least from the Cancer Society's perspective, that the calls that we have had in on the Mission Cancer, I think we have 100% return rate to Norway, which is, yeah, it couldn't be better, of course. And the overall return rate from the Horizon Europe program, I think, is about 3% or something, which is giving us more money back than we actually pay to the EU. So from a systemic perspective, things are going fine. But of course, from the specific individual researchers, there are, of course, issues that we need to address. But luckily, that's not my kind of responsibility. But I would like to comment on it. Yeah.
Just like to close the matter, you know, I've been in Norway for 20 years as a researcher, and the science that we have here is fantastic. But what I have seen in my time here, like over the last decade, there's been a systematic cut in the funding to universities. They're not getting the budgets that they had before. And now we're starting to see the impact. And that will continue over the next 5 to 10 years as well, as we get a decline in the size of faculties, because we basically don't have the money to be able to replace people. So it may be fine now, but I'm worried about the future.
Yeah.
I'm very happy that you started to discuss EU, because it's an enormous untapped potential for funding. And I think some of you said that this is actually something that we are doing quite well, and we are, increasing our tap into that. Some of the really, innovative groups are now looking for the US funds. This is completely new. So they go to DARPA and these funds, which are even bigger. On my honorable colleague here, and a little bit about bureaucracy, I worked for as an EU Commission expert, actually, in reviewing your program, the innovation pathway. And I think it's fair to say that you have to accept, if you give away 60 or 600 million, that you need some sort of bureaucracy to ask how are you going to use this money, and are we allowed to control it? So yes, it's quite a bureaucracy on that, but I think it's fair, because the system is a little bit sluggish. But be aware, you can also have experts to do this for you. They don't have to sit in the university. Many of the successful grants are actually written by experts. And this is an expert task as anything else in science. I know the Research Council doesn't like that we use this type of funding because it's supposed to go, you know, maybe Johan can comment on that. But 2 comments then. Explore the EU system. It's not that difficult. It's fair to ask for some bureaucracy. I'm not sure whether the route is to actually pump up the university with administrators to do this. There are sources outside that can actually do this very well. Thank you.
Thank you. Kjetill or Johan?
I have a kind of comment that is on the issue that was already raised here, and it's also with, also thinking about the young people here for the future, and that is the fact that universities, the economy at the universities are really threatened, and it's going down, and it's problematic. Same goes for many of the research institutions outside universities, also the research institutes. And this will, unfortunately, have an impact on the future for all of you, because now the old professors like me, for example, won't be replaced at the University of Oslo when I retire, because there are no money for positions. We already have a deficit. So if we take out that system, the university system, the research institute system, then that will impact science tremendously, even though you can do things in private, because we are the one that delivers the candidates and the new science. And if we are set back, this is gone. So this responsibility, which is a political responsibility, that has to be taken into account. And the guy here with the smile I showed to you, Borten Moe, and his other people around him, they don't care about this. They don't care at all about this. And that is the biggest threat I can see.
Johan and then Marianne.
There were a question here from the first row regarding the complexity of science or the interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary. I think my take on it is that I think you're right, both of you guys actually, that there will be probably not that much growth when it comes to the single researcher doing a single research project on basic science, curiosity-driven, like FRIPRO with the program. I would not be surprised if that should not see the growth that many of us would like to see. And that's why, I mean, both of us are talking about team up with people of all different kinds that could be beneficial to your project. It could be patients, it could be companies, it could be, I mean, whatever. Because all of that is going to add something to your project, and of course it's going to be tougher to run. It's going to take more leadership from you guys. But I think by doing that, you open yourself from a number of different sources to apply for funding. And you might be surprised, it might actually be fun.
Marianne Fyn, University of Oslo. So I have 2 things. I think it's very problematic that most of the funding for health research or life sciences research goes through the helseforetak, because most of the life scientists, they are outside of the helseforetak. You need, not in Helse Midt-Norge, but the others, you need a position in helseforetak. That's why, so it's a good that they have been strengthened, like clinical research in Norway has been tremendously strengthened, and you say also that now they are competitive, so they compete for the other fundings as well. I think that's kind of a problem for the sector. Another thing is that we talk about young scientists, which also is very kind of worried about. I think that there is a very limited areas where they could compete for funding, for independent funding. We say that they need to have independent funding in order to compete for positions or these larger grants. But there's extremely little funding for them to apply for their own project. Say for a PhD, you have some, like you have Cancer Society, you have Folkehelse, den Nasjonalforeningen. There's a few of them. But in the Research Council now, there's only the mobility grant for the postdocs, which has now become extremely competitive. There is no other areas or arenas for them to compete. So if you could comment on that, I would be happy.
It's correct that quite a amount of the money is channeled through the through the hospitals, and I mean it's. And I think many people argue that those money is kind of locked in that system, and it's not accessible from abroad, both from the institute, from the companies, and for researchers based solely on the university. I think that's not something I mean, I'm not in a position to do that. We are trying to collaborate with the hospitals in a fruitful way as possible. I'm sitting in all their strategic meetings and things like that, but it's a good question. The young scientists, that is, I also agree, of course. It's not sustainable that we have so low acceptance rate on both the mobility but also the young investigator award. And that's problematic. You should be aware that the board, I've been in charge of that board for a number of years, they are prioritizing the young and up-and-coming to a large, probably a larger degree than what I think you guys think. They are channeling quite a bit of money towards that, the young investigators. Like, for instance, last year, that was the only call that was, or this year, that was the only call that was out. That's because they prioritized the young ones. Thank you.
I think I want to follow up with the rest of the panel on that one, because if you look into the crystal ball now and look at the future, and what's your stable tips for the young researchers? What kind of funding will there be in 10 years? Do you have any comments on that?
Yes. Okay, here is the solution. Now, I'm just going to comment. It was mentioned here that Norway is one of the countries with the highest public financing on research. There's hardly any country who spends more public funds on research than Norway. We do, however, have a lower contribution from the private sector, and we don't have the big funds like they do in Sweden. We have a business and an industry which have a lower research intensity than the average OECD countries. And we need, and there's reasons for this. It's got to do with the structure of our business and industry. But we need to get more money from the private sector into research. We need to have a higher. We need it to be more. We have to have more attention on research. So we're working with the Ministry of Education and Research on a strategy to increase the financing from the private sector. And there's been a lot of interest, and we get a lot of proposals, and I think there's hope for mobilizing more funds from the private sector. I just want to say one other thing. You all, you probably are aware of the mission approach in the EU, which is quite grand and substantial and everything. We are trying it out in Norway as well. One of the areas that we're trying it out is I think we were mentioning food for agriculture and farming, which is the responsibility of our ministry, which I think is a good approach to get more, get a better policy out of research and other policy tools such as regulations. So working with researchers, working with regulators to get good solutions within a shorter time frame. And it might sound kind of narrow, but I mean this is a big area that we need to solve. We need to get sustainable food for this area. So this is something that we're trying out. We're getting a lot of attention and help, and the institutions and university are very eager to take part in this kind of new approach. So this is just to, yeah.
Thank you. I think you, Ahmed, want to comment on that.
I work in pharmacy, right? So at the University of Bergen, for example, if we graduate a student, we only get 60% financing because that's the model that's been put in place. We got 5 fully financed positions there a number of years ago, and the last government that came in cut those positions, so we've lost that. If we want to try, we're currently in a situation in Norway, in my field, in pharmacy, where we're importing pharmacists because we don't have enough of them. Now, if we want to build up that sector, and we want to have companies coming in here, we have to have a robust education system pumping out pharmacists that are not only going to go into community pharmacy, but are actually going to do research as well. That needs investment from the government to be able to get that. And then the companies will come. Sweden is a completely different scenario. They have a long history of pharmaceutical development. So if the government has ambitions that we are going to extract funding from industry, then give us the tools to do it.
Yeah, and can I just comment shortly on that? Because it's a very good point. And I think even to get the PhDs out in the industry as well, we need to facilitate for that. But it's still possible to come with to send in proposals to our work on the 2% strategy. So there's a website. So if you'd like that, just yeah.
So I think it was first here, and then Ruth. Oh, Ruth was first. Okay.
So the fundamental problem in Norway with the research funding is that it's way too thinly spread. So it might be that you're spending a lot per capita, but we are too many for competing for it, right? You see it on the success rate. Without the funding from the NFR, we can't do any research. So I get 10,000 crowns for master students. That's hardly enough to pay the access fees for the instrumentation. Right, so we can't do any research without the NFR funding. For the NFR funding, competition is absolutely fierce, and everybody knows that there can be no fair distribution of the money with so low success rate. So I think we need a debate in Norway. How many professors do we want? Do we want all the professors to do research? And if yes, how many money are we prepared to pay for this? So, and this is the debate we need. Because at the moment, you generate a generation of frustrated professors who are writing research proposals one after the other, get maybe 2 or 3 papers in a row, like I get some funding, but you start in the treadmill to writing, and it's not a system that is sustainable. Like it's completely inefficient.
No, anybody wants to comment? Do you agree?
Well, of course, it's. I mean, it's the last comment from the audience is very valid. The growth in the research spending through the Research Council, I don't think that's going to be 2-digit in the years to come. And when you see significant growth in a number of scientists within this field, then you need to ask yourself, what is the problem, or where is the solution? And I think to have better leadership at the universities, and to take those tough questions, should we spend this money on a salary, or on our running budget, right? For instruments, for technology, whatever. I think that's the key. That's the key. Because the growth in people is much steeper than the growth in funding.
Yeah, just a comment on the 10-year perspective that the moderator wanted. 10-year perspective that the moderator wanted to. There you are. Yeah. So the 10-year perspective. I worked 15 years in the Swedish life science industry, and I don't think for 10 years that the Wallenberg that Professor Jakobsen actually alluded to here will happen. 3.1 billion. And the reason, I mean, I worked in one of those companies that the investor Wallenberg family actually owned. They own Saab, AstraZeneca, and all of that stuff. That is not going to happen in 10 years in Norway. Norway is a political, beautiful system where the state, according to OECD, has the largest public sector in the world if you deduct from oil offshore. We need to understand that and work to the government to make the best of a very, very rich source of public funding. If you go to EU, I would have to say that the competition just gets 10 times tougher. So if you are on a 10% level to achieve grants from Johan, then you will have 1% in the EU. If you go to the US, it'll be 50 times tougher. This is something that the universities needs to work with. This is the competition. This is the real world. Science is international. So I think that we will probably not see the big grants from, and I don't think that industry will actually be able to give money back like they do in Denmark, which is the most innovative country in Europe right now, and also Sweden, which is 10, 15 years ahead of us. Thank you.
I could just give a few numbers. FreePro is roughly 5% success rate. And of course, I agree with Henrik that you cannot compare the numbers. But if you look at the numbers regarding how many apply to FreePro versus how many apply to different programs in the European Union, the grant acceptance rate in the European the programs in Europe is 5 times higher than FreePro. It's between 20 and 25%. I saw the numbers yesterday. So the success rate, and as Simen mentioned, it's 100% in cancer mission is like in a focused area. So the success rate in Europe is great. You asked the 10-year perspective. What I want to see? When you get a new person in the lab, what should you do? Of course, you should have the person to be trained in everything that he or she needs to do right, but also talk about what you're doing. Talk about the science, talk about the excitement coming into the lab. Speak to your colleagues, your neighbors. Because to talk about science, that is important. The politicians, they need to see what science is, what science can do, what science means. It's a gray, hairy ball. It's mystery to many people. They don't know that science is both beautiful. It can be a solution. Look at what science did to guide us through COVID. Look what science... And we have all this example. Have your guys talk about it. Make networks, international, in Norway. And that's a different skill set, I think. Thank you.
I think that you asked a little bit about looking into the crystal ball and future, and I'm not looking into the crystal ball by saying what I'm going to say now, but this is again wishful thinking, and I like to think about me as an optimistic person that hope for the best, but often experience the opposite, and that would be that. I mean, who is really the rich? What is the rich body in Norway? That's the oil fund. And I think, in my wishful thinking, and knowing that this is not supposed to happen most likely, and they're not supposed to use the money that way, use some part of the oil fund for research. I don't think it will drive inflation. And I think it would rather support industry in industrial development in Norway. We are so filthy rich. And we don't have industry that will support strong enough. It is the oil fund. I mean, it has to be. That's my thinking. I'm pretty sure that this will never happen, but I'm saying it anyway.
And it goes with what Ole Johan said, that you have to engage, right? You have to speak up. You have to let the politicians know that this research is important.
Yeah, thanks. I don't think we will see, in a 10 years perspective, I don't think we will see any major governmental increase in research funding. But I think we will need to try to work together to kind of motivate more private investments in R&D, and I'm pleased to hear that the ministry is working together with the Ministry of Research and Education on a strategy for increasing this. And I think that we can look to other countries that are doing this, and they are doing this through, for example, through financial funds, like Sweden has this on Cancer Fund, which is a fund for kind of cancer research. But also the fishery and the sea industry here in Norway also has a voluntary industrial fund that funds research to a large extent. And we have to look for kind of those type of mechanisms here in Norway as well. But then we would also need to kind of get some motivation from the ministry themselves to kind of start doing this. And for the, if I'm allowed to kind of give some advice for the future professors here, I presume. I think that the most important thing is easier said than done, but just finish that PhD.
Finish your PhD.
It's not the best advice, but don't do extracurricular work, but finish that PhD and get done with it, and publish most of your papers when you're in your postdoc. That's when it matters. And of course, try to kind of get involved to the best research groups that you are able to get in contact with. Look for the best ones. That's the kind of the key that will get you the best research funding in the EU, but also through collaboration in the US and everything. They will look at who you kind of are working with.
Okay. And yeah, we have a question here, and yeah, here.
Okay, so I want to give a little bit of credit to the Research Council, because in 2017 you did something really clever. You started the Digital Life Initiative, and you said that we need to be transdisciplinary in our research. We need to do RRI, and we need to have user involvement, etc. And this year, you see in the calls in the EU, this is their requirement. And here Norway was actually before EU in putting down these kind of requirements and this kind of expectations. So we in Norway now is very well prepared. It's like, yeah, we've done that for many years already. We'll fix it. So I think that was a very strategically clever choice you did back then. But looking forward, what do you think would be the most significant or strategic choices that you have to make now to be well positioned in the years to come? I would be interested to hear your reflections on that.
Well, I've been trying to allude to what that's throughout this session, actually. I mean, what you have done here, I would like to do, my final comments would be that the Digital Life Initiative is excellent. It was good, the idea was good, I agree, and it's still excellent today. But it's not going to be enough tomorrow. So you need to broaden up. There should be a bunch of companies here. There should be a bunch of patient groups. It should be a bunch of something I don't know what is. That's the challenge to you guys. I think that's what you need to succeed, to do the maze run in the future. And I think being as scientists, because you're going to get more no's than yes. And if a no kind of kills you, then you're going to die. So, and a no should just be an inspiration on the way to the next yes, and to find that path. And of course, I mean the history is a lot of struggle, but be aware that we all want you to succeed, European Union as well. So, and I would be a little bit hesitate to advise you to come to the politician to ask for help, if you can solve the problem yourself. So work with your institutions, work with in the science community. Try to do the hard work yourself, not ask somebody else to do it for you.
We are allowed for one more question, and I. Yeah. Okay. Over here.
Yeah. Okay. Let's say, as a self-appointed, let's say, young researcher, I would like to ask a comment. Let's say that I heard a lot from other young researchers. Should I stay in Norway? Because 2 years ago, I have colleagues that are a bit older than me, and they were like in 35, 45, and they are like quite successful. They have good CVs, and then they see the prospect. And I myself, I'm a bit younger, but I see the prospect and like, should I remain? Because is the system solid? Because I have been in Switzerland and Denmark doing research. I came here with my funding, I won other fundings, but in the last, so I have a short outlook, but these other people who have been a bit longer, they're like, the outlook is like, the system doesn't seem to be solid. If one professor are going away, when these people goes away, you lose know-how, and you also lose attractiveness. So it looks like there is not a solid system to maintain the know-how for the future, or a solid system and path to be built for younger researchers. And since I already come from outside, I mean, many people are thinking, I mean, now we have 5 associates in 10 years, probably, maybe one will get a professorship, but already 2 of them, compared to 2 years ago, they were like, oh yes, maybe professor, but 2 of them are already thinking, I go back, I don't know, Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark. And so, yeah, it's like a comment, but it's like, I think we talk about money and everything, but it's like, these are patch-ups. It's like we should maybe think more about creating a solid system and with a future outlook as well.
Thank you. Any final thoughts? I don't think I should open for that, actually. I think we're already over time. Thank you so much to the panel for giving us some excellent input, and to you, the audience, for giving really good questions. And you guys are going to stay here for a while, right? So we can grab you in the breaks. Thank you.